טוב, בוקר טוב לכולם, מי שכאן איתנו בלייב ומי שצופה בנו מהבית. אז אני תמר, ויש כאן איתנו את נטע ולן, אה, אב ובת, שידברו איתנו היום על תרגום אקדמי, עשה ואל תעשה, והרבה מאוד, נראה לי, עקרונות סופר פרקטיים ומעניינים שאתם הכנתם לנו. אני אגיד כמה מילים עליי ועל קודו, אז קודו, למי שלא מכיר במקרה והגיע אלינו, זה מיזם שעוזר לחוקרים להיות יותר פרודוקטיביים דרך מה שאנחנו קוראים לו לעבוד לבד ביחד. ואנחנו בעצם פשוט מאמינים בכוח של הקבוצה כדרך להפיג את הבדידות וכדרך להיות יותר אפקטיביים. ובשנים האחרונות צמחנו להרבה הרבה יותר מזה. אנחנו מתעסקים גם באמת בסדנאות, במה שקשור לסטורי טיילינג, עמידה מול קהל, נטוורקינג, עכשיו גם AI לחוקרים, ועוד הרבה תכנים רלוונטיים. ריטריט גם היה לנו ויהיה עוד השנה, בעזרת השם. מרתונים פיזיים, קודו אונליין, שזה מפגשי זום כאלה שמגיעים ומגדירים יעדים ביחד, ואז בעצם כל אחד עובד על היעדים שלו. וזהו, ואני תמר, אני המייסדת של המיזם, נעים להיות כאן. ותודה רבה לנטע ולן שהסכימו בטובם להנחות את המפגש הזה. אז הבמה שלכם, אני רק אציין שהמפגש מוקלט וגם יעלה אחר כך ליוטיוב, אז אם מישהו ככה לא רוצה שיראו את הפנים שלו מאיזושהי סיבה, או מרגיש צורך בפטריות, אז תדעו שאנחנו נעלה את זה. הבמה שלכם.
תודה תמר, תודה רבה רבה על ההזמנה ועל כל הדברים המדהימים שאת עושה, שאני עוקבת אחריהם כחוקרת צעירה בעצמי. אנחנו נעבור עכשיו לאנגלית, אבל אם למישהי או למישהו יש שאלה, לן מדבר עברית שוטפת, ואתם מוזמנים לפנות עליו בשאלות באנגלית. אז hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Netta, I'm an early career researcher. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at BT. Me is my father, Len Schramm, who's been an editor and translator for about, for about
40 some odd years.
40 years. And he does mainly humanities and social sciences. And today we're going to be talking about translation, a problem that I myself face. Should I be writing in English? As I was educated, I was born in Israel, I was educated in the Israeli system. I can speak English. I sound almost native, but English is not my native language. Should I be, if I want to publish, and I'm always wanting to publish, should I be writing in English? And then is my English good enough? So this will be about self-translation into English, and also thinking about the problems about if you do not want to translate yourself and you want to use a translator, how to choose your translator correctly. So we're going to get some tips from Len, from his experience, trying to let us understand the process from the point of view of the translator. And because I myself am early career scholar, I also know that we never have funding and we always have to pay out of pocket. So that's going to be another topic we're going to be talking about. How do you navigate the system when you still don't have a tenure track position and you don't have money to pay and your English isn't good enough? So my first question to you is, how can you define what translation is?
Translation is what pays for my food. That's what it is. No. Translation is taking material that is ideas that have been expressed in words in one language and putting those same ideas in the best words in the target language. In order to do this, you need to know the grammatical structures of both languages and the idioms of both languages and how to move from one to the other. It's a question of context, it's a question of culture, it's a question of vocabulary and jargon. It's quite something. Now, I'll begin with an example and then, and better definition. Uhetsit knesiyah kidei limchot neged avodah zarah. Actually, I just gave it away by the way I read it, so let me go back. הוא הצית כנסייה כדי למחות נגד עבודה זרה. If you translate that word by word, you're going to get, he set fire to the church to protest foreign labor. You're going to say, ooh, that's horrible. Who would do that? The sentence that I just read you in English actually appeared in the Jerusalem Post some years ago. So you have to not simply translate word for word. You have to think about what it means. I've got all sorts of examples of those, but I don't want to bother you. We don't have time for them today. Now, back in the Middle Ages, when Hebrew translation into Hebrew became something serious, the Ibn Tibbon family originally called themselves Ma'atikim, copyists. After a generation or two, they realized the translation isn't copying. You cannot take a word in Arabic, and even though it's cognate to Hebrew, and substitute another word in Hebrew for it and keep going. It doesn't work that way. So they started calling themselves Metargamim, based on an Aramaic word, which means interpret, but also to explain. We are explaining in Hebrew what the text says in Arabic. We are not, and that's how I became a metargem. I don't copy from Hebrew to English or from French to English. I read the material and think about how it should be expressed in English. And that's what good translation is, not bad translation, not machine translation of the past 40 years. That's what translation is.
So in your example, avodah zara cannot be broken up into avodah and zara, obviously, because then you'll get foreign labor. And you also say that it's a matter of understanding the text and also about knowing the relevant jargon in both languages, in the original and in the target language. I think that when I am writing an article in English and most of my source material is written in English as well, that's much easier because then I already know the relevant jargon. But it gets more complicated if I'm translating an article from the Hebrew into the English, my own work, and all the sources I'm quoting are in Hebrew. Then it's much more difficult because I don't really know what would be the correct term in the target language. It's complicated. So I would like to know from you what it looks like when somebody contacts you and says, I have a job for translation. Would you do it? What do you do as a translator? If I understand it from your perspective, maybe it will be easier for us to choose the correct translator for our jobs.
Well, the first thing I asked is, what is your book or your paper about? What's the field? Because obviously there are subjects and fields I won't touch, or that I would have to learn a lot about, and it's not worth my time or your time for me to have to start learning them. So that's the first thing. If they tell me that it's in the natural sciences and all sorts of things, even though once upon a time I knew a lot of chemistry, I won't touch it. It's not for me, and it's not. So that's what we start with. If it's in Bikot Mikra or archaeology, even musicology I've gotten into recently, that's fine. So send me. But I need to see it. Even though once I know the subject, I still need to see it. If somebody says to me, well, I can't send it to you yet, but I've got this paper that's 10,000 words in Hebrew. How much is it going to cost me to translate? And the subject is something that you say you know. How much is it going to cost me to translate it? I will throw them out a figure. I'll say, that's the pro forma rate. I don't commit myself to it. Usually I will give them the highest possible rate and say, it won't be more than that, but until I see it, I can't really tell you because there are all sorts of issues that can come up. And I want to see it. That's when it talks about translation.
Do you give a deadline? I mean, how do you work with deadlines?
Well, okay, that's the other question, and that's another question I ask. What's your deadline? And what's your Also, what's your funding, I ask? And also, do you have a word limit? This is something I don't want to forget to mention this half an hour from now, so I'll say it right now. If you're writing an article for a journal that says they have a word limit of 10,000 words, don't write 10,000 words of Hebrew, because 10,000 words of Hebrew will be 15,000 words of English, and it's very hard to cut it. I mean, it's cutting. I do it all the time for clients who have gone over the limit, but there's a limit to how much you can cut. Okay, so
Okay,
yeah. So getting back to this, and if it's an editing job, I will say, well, send it to me, and then I will assess what it's going to be, because there's editing that is simply putting in commas, and there's editing that is effectively rewriting. And so there is no standard rate for editing. Okay.
I know some translators do have a standard rate, but it sounds to me like is the material and give a slide and not have a one size fit for all. And okay, that's great. But my question is the other way around. For instance, let's say I have a deadline for some grant or some postdoc position or something or other, and I ask around and people give me 5 WhatsApp contacts here. These are translators I've used. How do I
lost you?
Did you lose me? Now do you hear me?
Now I hear you, yes.
So the question is, how do I choose a translator?
Me. You need experienced translators, those who have been in the business for 5 or 10 years or more, will be able to give you recommendations from other clients or send you to material they have translated, books, articles, and so on. We assume that if you're an early career academic, by the way, you have access to all these journals through your institution. So you don't have to, it isn't a problem if it says, well, I have something published in this journal, you'll be able to access it, which Stam Amcha can't. That's the first thing. Do you have, you should ask somebody, do you have experience with this particular topic? This is a very specific topic. And sometimes if many translators, I hate to say this, will say yes, because they want the work, but their experience is minuscule, minor.
From your point of view, would it be okay for some prospective client to ask for a sample?
Okay. For me, after I've been 40 years in the business, I say, no, I don't give samples for short jobs. You can assume the fact that I've been doing this successfully for 40 years means I know what I'm doing. Or here's a list of all the books that I've translated, and you can Google me and find the articles that I've translated, and you can judge for yourself. On the other hand, when it's a book or a very, very long article that's important, eventually what's happening is that your name is being signed to something that I wrote. You have to be comfortable with my voice. So I will insist, I will insist that you take a sample from me. It could be 1,000 words, 2,000 words. I will say to you, what part of your book or what part of your do you want me to translate? Do you think is most representative? Sometimes the author is just lazy or doesn't have an idea how to answer the question. Say, just do the introduction. But sometimes we'll say, in chapter 3, it gets really down into the nitty gritty. That's where I want to see what you do. That's free. Yeah.
So you give a free sample for a big job. That's what you're saying.
And that's basically common. I insist on it.
And this is common practice, in your opinion?
I don't know what other people do. There are some people who can't afford to do that. I'm sure this is what I have always done.
Yes.
So.
And so if I have a contact of someone who's just starting in the business, she might be a little cheaper and I want to work with her because I don't have any funding, I'm paying out of pocket, then I should ask her for the very least for an example of an article in the original Hebrew and then her translation into English so I can see what kind of work she's done. That's what you're suggesting?
You really, really should. You should not be getting, tul basak, a pig in a poop. That's a good
Yeah.
example. The idiom in one language and idiom in the other language, they mean the same thing. The pig is not a chatul. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so now I have a really big question. I don't know
Yes.
if you can answer, but we can try. Should an Israeli who's in the, we're writing all the time, we need to be publishing all the time. English is not our native language. Should we be writing in Hebrew? Should we be, yeah, Elisa just wrote in the
I
chat
know we'll get to that. Yes,
the
we'll
chat
get to that. Yeah.
GPT. Right. So
Yeah.
the question is, should I be writing in Hebrew and paying for full translation? Or should I be writing in English and then paying for editing? What should I be thinking about? What should I consider in making this choice?
Well, I can't give a one-size-fits-all answer for this one. Editing, as I already said, editing can be less expensive than translating, but a very bad or even average English text will not become superb. There's a limit to how much the translator can improve it. Many translators, in fact, don't improve it. But even if they are, those belong to the few of my colleagues who can do that. It's not going to be really elegant, superb. Wow, that person really knows how to write, that the editor or the readers will say. Of course, on the other hand, if it's jargon heavy, if it's the jargon of a particular discipline and you know it, you might want to write it in English. On the other hand, it sometimes just makes sense to write it in Hebrew for the reasons I'll get to, but simply to embed the terminology in English where you think the translator might know it. The musicology article I'm doing right now, what I was working on this morning, the authors were kind enough to plug in some technical Hebrew English terms here or there that I didn't know or that they thought I might not know. So there are three options in answer to your question. You can write in Hebrew and pay for a translation. In almost every case, you'll get the best result if you have a good translator. Not every translator is, I hate to say this, but there are translators who really blow it. But that's the best results you'll get. Another possibility is to write your draft in Hebrew and then translate it yourself. This works because that way you produce the first draft without having to wrestle with, how do I say this? You think in English, in Hebrew rather, you structure it in Hebrew. So this way, your first draft, even if it's final, will say what you want much better, even if it's polished, than if you wrote it in English, because you could focus on your ideas. So then you translate it yourself. The advantage of this is that, if a client tells me that this is what he has done or she has done, I had this very recently, I say, okay, fine, send me your English, but also send me your original Hebrew, because then where I'm not sure what you mean, where there's a possible ambiguity, I can look at your Hebrew and often we'll be able to figure out what you meant. And that saves the job from going back and forth 2, 3, 4. I have books that have gone back 5 times to the author until we get everything answered.
Yeah,
So
this
that's
is a point, we didn't think about. You talk about going back and forth 4 or 5 times. Do you limit the number of times a client can come back with questions?
That's a very good question, and it depends on how much I love the client. How long we work together, how closely we work together. When I to young academics to whom I give a discount, there's a limit. There's a limit. I'll take it back once. I will not do it 3, 4, 5 times. If after you send it back to me and then I send it back to you, you have 1 or 2 specific questions, I will answer them. But I will not go over the text again and again and again. And when I say I go over them 5 times, that doesn't mean I'm on the 4th go around now on a book that I hope will come out next next year. I'm reading it all through, but I'm only making a few changes here and there because basically it's done. There's a few things where the client never understood me or I never understood the client, and we have to get it together.
But this answer tells me that a translation, choosing a translator, it's also building a relationship with an individual, with someone who reads your work, not like an advisor, but like, and then this back and forth is more than just, you know, a technical thing. You said your immediate response was how much I love the client, because it's a relationship between people. And that needs to be taken into account when you choose your client, that you need to not think that this person is really obnoxious. Maybe that's a tip.
I will confess that I have one client whom I love dearly, whom I also find to be somewhat obnoxious in the way that she insists on getting every little thing right. But I love her dearly, and therefore I give her what she wants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, but
Or you can write it in English and have it edited without a Hebrew original. This can be problematic. I have another client whom I love dearly, who after a while, I told him, write in Hebrew. It will get a better result. The problem is that sometimes he has papers that are already in English, or he gave a conference presentation in English, and that's what he's got. So he has to send it to me in English. As I said, he's a very good client. So but there comes a time with some clients when I say to them, send it to me in Hebrew. I'm not interested in editing your English. It's just not worth my headaches and your heartbreak. But okay, now,
yeah.
So okay, so that's the answer. But the answer to this question of which of those three you should do depends on how good your English is. And as I already pointed out, the first issue here is the rate. If your English is not on a very high level, you're not going to save a lot by asking me, at least, to edit it, because the editing is going to be very difficult. And you might as well have had written it in Hebrew, which is so much easier for you and produces a better result. Okay, in any case, you need, no matter if you write it in English and you're sending it up to make sure you have an editor who could be a translator, who knows Hebrew well enough to be a translator, at least has a decent command of a Hebrew. There are still a few editors in this country, English editors, who come to this country. The only skill they've got is that they know English. They may have been English teachers in America. Don't really understand your Hebrew. They don't know how your mind works. They don't understand the Hebrew structures. So in other words, don't send it off to a cheap editing mill in India. Nothing. That's where the cheap editing mills tend to be these days, South Asia, because the person there won't know how your mind works. A good example of this, by the way, not Hebrew, has to do with if you know that your author thinks in Russian, for example, and she wrote at this point, you know, he dropped composition. Now, that's a perfectly good English sentence, and no editing program, no AI will stop to wonder that this means that he stopped writing music. But I knew enough, because I knew that the author was Russian, to ask whether she meant that he stopped working on the particular piece he was writing at the time, because in Russian, there's no difference, there's no definite article. In English, he dropped composition, means he stopped writing music. He dropped composition, means he put a piece of time and went to work on something else. So your editor has to know how, this is an example from Russian, but your editor has to know how your mind in Hebrew works if you want to get a really good result.
So
okay.
This brings us to the I know you prepared a few slides about Hebraisms and really the most common mistakes Israelis make when they're writing in English. But before that, I have one last more practical question. As a graduate student, a master's degree student, a graduate student, even a postdoc, you often do not have funding, or you get a one-time allocation for 2,000 shekels or something like that. And you want to use it in the one place where it's going to mean the most. Where should you use the money? On what?
Okay. Well, the first thing is that I will often tell people, and I'll say, yeah, that's if you want a good result, that's what it's going to cost. Sell your firstborn son and pay me because you want, but that's it. You what you need, where you need to put your children, firstborn son, secondborn daughter, whoever, is where it will be of the most benefit to you, where acceptance of this paper will, or this proposal will open doors for you in the future. You have to realize that whatever you are submitting has to make it past the editor and the readers. Every awkward phrase, every grammatical mistake, or a miscommunication because the sentence doesn't mean what you think it does, it will add to your readers' discomfort with your article and lead them to give it a thumbs down. Even if your ideas are wonderful, they simply won't. Sometimes they will go back to the editor and say, if she rewrote this article, we could consider accepting it. But often there are so many of these things, they just feel, they would not even read to the end. They say, this isn't. They'll read a few pages and they'll send it back. Now, elegant or at least correct English will encourage them instead to point out the factual problems, the conceptual problems, and then you'll have a chance to rewrite it. Okay, now this is a good place to go to segue into AI editing, whether this is ChatGPT, or which I haven't much used, or Grammarly, which I've used on occasion. As one of my clients said to me, he was writing in English, and he put every sentence through ChatGPT to make sure he wouldn't have any gross mistakes in English. But at the end, he said to me, all right, so the English is correct, but I don't know if that's what I meant. The artificial intelligence, at least as it exists today, I don't know what it'll be like in 30 years or even in 10 years, cannot read your mind. It can only consider what is the most likely meaning of what you've put on paper and edit that. But that may not be what you meant. When I put something through Grammarly, I find myself rejecting half of the suggestions because it didn't understand me. It's not going to come up now, but there's a difference between Grammarly will always tell you, don't say in order to, just write to. But there are sentences where in order to and to don't mean the same thing. I don't have a slide the slide from the course about that didn't make it into the slides for today, but it's true. So
yeah, I mean,
okay, yeah.
I mean, as someone who does use Grammarly and does use ChatGPT, I totally can relate to this. I also usually ask for advice, and if I'm not sure the advice is correct, then I don't take it because I can't trust the statistics behind. Okay, but now we want to talk about Hebraisms, and we will share a few slides, like really very, very common mistakes. I know mistakes I make all the time that you've collected. But before that, can you maybe define what a Hebraism is?
Okay, a Hebraism is simply using a word or a structure that is natural in Hebrew, but is awkward or wrong in English. There are so many of them, I wouldn't know where to begin. But as aside from the fact that there are a few on these slides here, these slides you said, yeah, okay, your screen sharing. These slides are because after working with Netta and other graduates, students, writing their papers and dissertations, and working in, as I often do with my clients, in tracking mode, so that they could learn from my corrections, I discovered that when it comes back to the client, they're too busy getting the file out to actually internalize the corrections, even when I explain them. So over a period of about 3 years, I collected material and organized it and turned it into a document of 150 pages, which is the basis of the course that I offered last year and hope to be offering again next week, and starting next week. And here are some of the slides from it. Is this centered on my screen? It's not. I don't know.
It's
Netta,
not
on my screen?
centered.
Okay, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
So you're going to give
Yeah.
us a few tips of very common mistakes you see that Israelis do. And if I understand correctly, the reason why it is important to use a translator or an editor in English who knows Hebrew is because you are very, very sensitive to these types of mistakes because you see them all the time and you usually understand how. So let's go with the examples.
Okay. In Hebrew, it's natural to write בחודש מאי בשנת 2023. That's natural in Hebrew. If you say in English, the year 2023, you're in the month of May, you're on the wrong register, and you're not saying, and it just doesn't work. In the month of May is like in the merry, merry month of May. It's the song. It's just not how it's not how we say it.
That
It sounds
aggravates the editor who's going to give you a desk
yeah,
rejection.
things like that will aggravate him if you write in the year 2023. The Chicago Manual of Style says absolutely don't do it. The only reason for doing that is to avoid starting a sentence with a year, because you're not supposed to start with the numerals. So you would have to say in the year 2000 or the year 2020, whatever the rest of the sentence is. Other than that, don't say it. And if Chicago says don't do it, that means that it's going to bother people. Okay, another Hebraean. This really is not centered on my screen. I don't know why, but okay. So, in English, in Hebrew, rather, we have only one preposition for things. B'mai, b'yom rishon, ב-10 לינואר, כן, בשנת 2023. But English, for whatever reason, complicates things. And in a period, you say in May, in 2023. For a single day, you say on Monday, on January the 10th. And once again, if you write on May, that's totally, totally wrong. If you write in Monday, it's totally wrong. I mean, you shouldn't be making these mistakes. You should have read enough English not to. But the fact of the matter is that the idea is not to think that if you read enough English, you won't be making these mistakes. But reading is not necessarily internalizing. And you have to learn to think about these things. Okay, and that's okay. That's now it's entered. Yes, I don't know what you did. Okay. Okay. Here's one that drives me bananas, which is that in Hebrew there is one word mechkar and one word choker. Okay. And therefore, you will find something about a researcher in English literature. That is not English. In English, research refers to experimental science, in the natural sciences, in some social sciences. It refers to, as it says here, intensive inquiry aimed at discovering new facts in any discipline. So you can have a researcher in history who goes and sits in archives to find out new facts. You can even have somebody who researches Shakespeare because they are researching the history of the text or something. But other than that, it's in the humanities, it's all scholarship. Okay, and as a result of this, a Talmid Mechkar in English is not a research student. This won't get you into trouble. It just sounds wrong. He's a graduate, or she is a. In England, they used to call them postgraduate students. Now they seem to be knuckling under to the Americans and saying graduate student. But okay.
You say it doesn't put you into trouble, but if you're writing your cover letter and your CV and you want to apply for a fellowship in a lucrative place in Europe or the UK and you write and you call yourself a research student, you sound silly if that's
You
not what's.
do. You sound student. Even if you're chemistry, you're a graduate student. Research is college. You're still a graduate student. This is simply the jargon, and you've got to get it right. And finally, we've got this interesting thing here that which translators from Hebrew to English have to learn. One of the earliest things that I learned, an academai in Hebrew is not an academic, because an academic is somebody who is being paid, is on the faculty. Whereas an academai here is anybody with a degree. It's not the same thing. And if you say, well, if you write on your cover letter, I'm an academic, meaning that you're a graduate student, they're going to say, yeah, where are you on the faculty? What do you teach? It's not.
This reminds me of something I've actually seen a few weeks ago where people gave themselves dargot and they've mistranslated their darga and they aggravated people very much, because you cannot, if you're not an adjunct professor, if you mistranslate that from something in the Hebrew which you're not in English and you say that about yourself, that's really bad, like really bad. I don't even remember what it was, but martze min hachutz, more, you know, like all these things. You got to know exactly what that's called in the domain specific in the UK, in Europe. Otherwise, you're giving yourself a title that you do not deserve. That's very dangerous.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. That was a great example.
I thought you were going to do this in reading mode, so we would only see the pages, by the way. If you're
in reading mode. Oh, that would be wonderful. But the problem is,
I sent you a PDF. Yeah, the PDF in reading mode.
yes. Okay. Let's do. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening here.
Oh, that's okay. I mess it up all the time. So, not the. That's why I did it. That's why I did the PDF instead of the. Not P.
I'm sorry. I have to reshare my screen
Okay. Yes.
and do it again. Okay. Is this what, do you see this?
No, not yet.
You don't
You have
see?
stuck. Now I don't. Now I do, but I don't see it as okay. Now I think this is what you're trying. But yeah, this is what we want. This is reading mode. Yeah. Fine.
Okay.
Great. Now you can go down to the next page or the next page.
Yes, sorry about that. I'm not on my own personal computer because my computer doesn't have a camera working. Okay, here we are. Okay?
זה העניין, שתנו לנו לעשות, אם יגדילו ימי הבחירה, אז אנשים יקחו ימי בחירה, אבל מצד שני.
Okay, go. You can go.
Okay. This is something that Israelis, Hebrew thinkers do all the time. You do it too, Netta. They will say, I'm afraid from. She died from a broken heart. Because in Hebrew, we have only the one preposition, me, min, me. But in English, you're afraid of something. You die of a broken heart. But just to make life interesting, because English never stops doing that, you might say she suffered from a broken heart. She died of cancer, but she suffered from cancer for many years. I have been trying to figure out if there is a rule to explain to people when you use of and when you use from. The answer is no. There is no rule. There are some people who have proposed rules. They don't work. This is something you simply have to know. These are called collocations, what word goes with another word to form a single grammatical sense. Basically, the answer is if you're a native speaker, you know. If you're not a native speaker, you have to find a native speaker to help you, or one of the various books or online forums or online sites that are full, that give lists of collocations.
This is where I must say that I use ChatGPT and I ask, is this idiomatic English? And explain why. And if I'm not sure, then I can do that. And I'm not 100% sure of the answer I'm getting, but if I think I'm right and I ask ChatGPT and ChatGPT affirms what I think, then I feel that's okay.
But look at the next example about Ernie's best friend. A rubber ducky is made of rubber. It is not made from rubber, but it might be made from recycled tires. Now, okay, so that's still being made from rubber, but that is not, this, say a rubber ducky is made from rubber is not telling you what its composition is. Okay, it's telling you how it was manufactured. This is a fun sentence. There are cases where that distinction could be crucial. And this is where, once again, you have to know to ask the AI. The AI is not going to tell you that there's a problem here. It hasn't reached that stage yet. I don't know if it ever will. You know, AI is a level. AI scrapes the internet for its source material. As more and more stuff on the internet went through AI, the result is going to be a lower and lower level. I think it's called, they call it slop. They don't know if it's, you got to be careful. You got to know what to ask. Your human editor still knows what to ask.
Right.
AI doesn't. Okay, what's next? Okay. Once again, these are collocations. You have verbs that in Hebrew take a direct object and in English don't, and vice versa. In Hebrew, you say shamarti alav, but you better not say I protected over him, which is a literal translation. Or you might say, right, eifu hasefer shechipasti. But if you turn that into where's the book I was searching, that means unless the book is an encyclopedia or a dictionary where you were looking up an entry, that's not what you meant. In English, you say, I protected him. And where's the book I was searching for, the book I was looking for? These are not parallel in terms of the structure. So in Hebrew, we have lit'alem mi, lehagen al. In English, that's to ignore or to defend it. In Hebrew, lechapes, direct object. And in English, to look for. These are structures that, once again, to native speakers are automatic, but not totally, because I consider Netta to be a native speaker, but her English is contaminated by her Hebrew because she uses both in every day, and her schooling was in Hebrew, and therefore she can make this mistake. I'm afraid from it without it setting off an alarm bell, but she should be very much afraid of that. Okay, you have to be aware of these things. Okay. Next.
I'm trying to move to the next, and
there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Hebrew often puts the date clause, the temporal clause, the time clause in the middle of the sentence. Misrad hapnim poel me'az shnat 2004 al basis tikunim b'chakika. If you turn that into English word for word, the ministry has been working since 2004 on the basis of legislative amendments. Nobody's going to misunderstand that, but it sounds weird. You have to put the time clause either at the start of the sentence or the end of the sentence, as the next two lines show there. Okay, next. Okay, going back to our arsonist at the very beginning. Here's an example of both of these things. If you do what's called an interlinear translation, which a lot of Bibles have, and you do Hu Hetzit Knesia B'Yafo, you're going to get he set on fire a church in Jaffa.
No.
That is totally not English and will irritate your reader or editor because in English, somebody's didn't turn off their speaker, because in English, you have to put what's called the adjunct, in this case, on fire, after the object, in this case, the church. So you have to write either he set a church, and you have to write he set a church in Jaffa, on fire. On the other hand, if you use a different verb for Hatzit, you can say, and turn it to set fire, but then it takes an indirect object. He set fire to a church in Jaffa. So you got to think. Next. Okay, now we're getting to verbs. We have got, maybe we've got maybe 10 minutes to go. Verbs, the verbal structure of Hebrew and the verbal structure of English are totally different. Hebrew has got a past, present, and future, or at least modern Hebrew has a past, present, and future. That's it. There are a few ways of playing with that structure to get other senses, but that's it. English has got many, many, many different forms. One of the most common mistakes that Hebrew speakers make when they go into English, perhaps not when they write, but because they will say it, they may write it as well, is to say, we are liking that he's coming tomorrow.
It's
Or
like, and your habit
we are liking chocolate ice cream. Okay, that is the progressive present in English, which has very different use. You have to say, we like chocolate ice cream, okay, because this is a state. It's not what you're doing right now. And okay, now, did you skip a page?
I want us to move into some examples from like academic writing that make this mistake.
Okay, fine. So then Hebrew does not have any way of distinguishing the simple past from the past, from the perfect. A perfect being a continuing action and a simple past being something that's over. So in my previous work, I argued, this is a simple past, a single action. Work implies one earlier article. In my previous work, in the article that I published last year, that's the only one that's relevant to discussion now. In previous work, I have argued this is present perfect continued action. So work implies several past publications. It wasn't just one. It's one. Not to. Okay, Hebrew. You can say I published 6 articles. פרסמתי 6 מאמרים. You can say I have published 6 articles. כבר פרסמתי 6 מאמרים. Okay, that is a way, the kvar is a way to put in the perfect. There's a problem though, which is that, does this mean you are going to be publishing more or not articles on the subject? Just so even the kvar doesn't quite work. Next. Okay, now we're getting into things that Hebrew doesn't have at all, doesn't know. These are only examples in English, but people say, I wish they would have decided that earlier, but they didn't. That was called a counterfactual. I wish they decided that earlier. And there are no parallel structures in Hebrew. You have to learn them. Next. Or here, if we had a bigger flat, we could invite friends to come and stay. Is correct. People, even English speakers, will often say, if we would have a bigger flat, we could invite friends to come and stay, but that's not correct English. These are counterfactuals, and there are specific English structures for it. I correct these all the time.
You say that when you're translating, you see your clients make mistakes with using counterfactuals.
But they're counterfactual in Hebrew, so they can't make them. There almost is no counterfactual in Hebrew, so they can't make that mistake. But if they write it in English, they'll do this. Okay, go on. Okay, this is something Hebrew. The Tanakh is full of the conversive vav, which takes the past and makes it a future, and the future makes it present. So verse after verse after verse after verse starts with a vav, and the translators over the generations have made every verse start with and. If you look at the first chapter of Bereshit, you'll see almost it's and. That's what's called parataxis, where you put clauses out one after another, the way a 3-year-old child goes. Says, I went to the playground, I got and I fell off and I hurt my knee and I cried. It's 3-year-old English. In English, you can use dependent clauses and say they live as Braslaver Hasidim in Beit Shemesh, where they are raising 6 children. It flows much more smoothly. Once again, you keep using parataxis, the first one, your readers are going to get tired. It's harder to read. If you do it elegantly with hypotaxis, it flows, it's smooth, they're going to move on to the next sentence. They're not going to stop and wonder. Go on. Okay, this is just a nice joke. This was a headline in the New York Times a couple of years ago. Working from home isn't working. This is an example of what is not here, but which the course has lots of polysemy, words that have more than one meaning, and therefore your meaning is totally ambiguous. Does working from home isn't working mean avodah me'abayit inena avodah, or does it mean avodah me'abayit lo ovedet? These are very different statements. The English means both, and no AI is ever going to question that. They will simply assume that you know what you're meaning. I will look at it and I will say, which of those did you mean?
So
Okay.
the time is running short, and I really want to say a few things about the few slides that you've shared here today, and that is that you also prepared this full course for me and my sisters, for my sisters and I, or something like that. Either one of those.
For my
I'm not
sisters
sure.
and me. It's for me, for my sisters and me.
And you prepared this course, and we've done it. We got the free family version, and we learned a lot about how to write English. And I personally really say that my writing in English has become better because I've seen all these examples. And you are running a new course next week. It starts next week, right?
It's supposed to start next Monday night, yes.
So I'm gonna post. You'll continue with your slides, but I'm going to post the link for registration. I know this course does cost, but you offer a discount to any person in your editing and translation services to anyone who will sign up for the course. I'm not exactly sure about all the details, your business details, but I think it's all posted in your Facebook page where you put stuff up every so often. So let's see a few more examples. And if anybody's interested in looking into this opportunity, which was really, really beneficial for me, you can enjoy that while we're continuing with the next example. Sign up is really soon, right? I mean, it's almost.
Yeah. Because the course is supposed to starting on Monday. You have until midday on Friday to register, so that Motzei Shabbat you can be sent instructions for how to pay. Because
How many sessions is it going to go for?
It's going to run between 12 and 14 sessions. Last year, the first version ran 14 sessions. I've been trying to contract it, but it depends on how much interaction there is. People ask questions. When people ask questions, obviously it goes on longer, which is fine. It's good. That's how you learn. But
and in this course, unlike today where you were talking about Hebraisms, the full course is to teach us to be our own editors. Would that be a good description?
That is exactly right. One of the people who is registered for the course is a client of mine, one of the clients I love dearly. But when she found out about the course, she registered immediately. She said, so that I won't have to depend on you so much anymore. Because the course costs money. You will save that money back in editing rates over the course of a few years. There's no question about it. Because, as I said, if you write bad English, making all of the mistakes that the course will teach you not to make, you're going to get charged more for editing. But if you don't make them, you're going to get charged less. Yeah. And we don't hear you, Netta. Your mic's off, Netta. Netta, you're not, mic's off.
I also have a feeling that whatever text I give to an editor, or if sometimes a journal actually pays for the editing themselves, the better the text is from the original, there's a delta. And the delta is like a constant. And if I give a really good text, then it becomes outstanding. But if I give a really bad text, it just becomes a little better. So the better my original draft is, the better it will be. I want to share a screen for one last example, which I know you said is too complicated to explain, but since I myself had a title of an article that I couldn't translate because of this problem, I really want us to go over it. And I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I
So
do.
let's go over that example, please, if you don't mind.
That's okay. I will point out that people who think in Hebrew will always say ben aleph lebet without stopping to think about exactly what this is. I have the feeling that if Dostoevsky had written in Hebrew, he would have written ben hachet v'ha'onesh, or D.H. Lawrence would have written ben banim la'ohavim, because what this means it's not just in English, what you're actually trying to say is either sons and lovers, or crime or punishment, or crime versus punishment, all of these things. It's not crime between punishment or between crime and punishment. But this is, so, I don't know what Net finally came to call that, because it's not between tradition and innovation. You're talking about tradition on the one hand and innovation on the other, but you're not talking about what's between. Between is a very complicated term, which is why I dropped this. I need to think about this more to explain it. I know I can't explain it. So finally, if you see this one title, a section title, Solidarity Between Diversity and Sameness, what this means in English is that diversity and sameness are friends. They have solidarity. Okay, and this is not what the author meant.
And AI, ChatGPT will not think that this is bad. They will.
That's right.
This is a perfectly normal sentence. Solidarity between diversity and sameness. Yes.
That's right. It will not catch it.
And in Hebrew, solidarיות בין גיוון ואחדות.
Whatever it was, I don't remember now. Whatever it was.
Right. So
the author sent me in English because the author thinks in Hebrew and put between there. I don't know. I no longer remember.
yes. Okay. I don't know if anybody would want to ask any question the last 2 minutes that we have here. But if not, so if you do, open your mic and you can ask a question. And if not, we'll finish with a nice quotation from Alice in Wonderland.
Alice, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
Wait,
Check
maybe let people find if
Yeah.
they have questions. Maybe give them
Okay.
things.
Okay. No. Okay.
Okay, I guess not.
And the Cheshire Cat says, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. Alice said, I don't much care where. The Cheshire Cat, then it doesn't much matter which way you go. But when you are writing your articles now, you do care which way you want to go. You want to get the article accepted. You want to have a career in academia. You want to be an academic in the English sense of the term. And in order to do that, today you have to master international English, standard English.
So if I summarize the tips that you gave us today, I would say the first thing you should know is what is your current level of English? Should you be writing in Hebrew and sending it to a translator? Should you be writing in Hebrew and translating it yourself and sending the translator both versions, or should you just be writing in English and sending it to the translator? When you choose a translator, you must make sure that the translator is competent by asking to see other translation works this translator has already done. And if it's a big job, insist on getting a sample. If it's a small job, maybe the person won't do it. And the final tips I have is be aware of very, very common mistakes that Israelis do because they think with grammatical and verb structures and different words. Like, we didn't go into this, like mas הכנסה in English, something you taught me. Mas הכנסה in Hebrew is a place. It's not a tax bracket, or it's not a tax thing. It's a place you go to. And that's crazy, you know. When you're writing in English, you don't realize that mas הכנסה cannot be translated like your avodah zarah.
I went to income tax, hotzip tol, to take out an exemption. People will understand that if they do Israel Hebrew.
Yes. Okay, I would like to thank you so much for these amazing tips. I've learned so much from you over the years, and now we've given a chance for other people to enjoy your experience and tips, and thank you so much for
And
joining me today.
I would be very happy if all of you signed up for the course, because the more the merrier, but also because I know that it's a benefit. You will benefit from it in the long term, not even in the short term, because on your first project that you send me, you'll get a discount.
Yeah. Thank you, Tamar, for having us today. This was really pleasant, and I hope you will find it beneficial for your community as well.
definitely. תודה, נטע ולן. אנחנו נסיים להיום. שיהיה לכולם בהצלחה בעברית ובאנגלית. יום מוצלח.
תודה רבה.
תודה.